Good morning, and welcome to this week's episode of Ask Dr. Murphy. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Katie Berg. I'm a research study coordinator with the Havey Institute, and I'll be leading today's discussion. I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Robert Murphy. Dr. Murphy, how are you doing today?
Doing just great in the heat here.
Dr. Robert Murphy is the executive director of the Havey Institute for Global Health and the John Philip Bair Professor of Infectious Diseases here at Northwestern's Feinberg School of Medicine. He answers your COVID, infectious disease, and public health questions each week here on the Havey Institute for Global Health's Facebook page. Today, Dr. Murphy will be addressing two viewer-submitted questions addressing the latest headlines and our lone U.S. COVID statistic through today, June 21st. We invite you to submit any questions down below via Facebook at NU Institute for Global Health or by email at globalhealthinstitute@northwestern.edu. Starting with our lone COVID statistic, average COVID deaths per day in the US were 32 daily, and in the same week in 2023, we had 99 deaths daily. Can you react to that, Dr. Murphy?
Yeah, well, really no change. I think with the last 3 weeks, we've had literally no change in this number. But remember that 32 deaths per day is almost 12,000 per year. So it's still a serious problem, and is some evidence that there's been some upticks in cases. We don't measure it anymore, so it's just sporadic reporting in people that or places that want to report. And the death, remember, doesn't come till much later. It's, you have to get sick, get worse, go in the hospital, don't get better, die. I mean, that's how you get to the death statistic, excuse me. So, we might see a little bump later if there really is a uptick in the number of cases, but there's definitely, everyone I talk to is seeing a lot of cases.
And on the note of the cases and the variants themselves, we talked last week about an FDA panel voting for future formulations of COVID vaccines. I understand there's been some news there. Could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so it started a few weeks ago, and it was reported that this is all Omicron variants. So the new vaccine is going to be geared toward that. Well, a couple months ago, the predominant one was JN1. And so that took over pretty quickly. We had a lot of questions about that. And they had decided already in this FDA to actually tell the companies to start making a vaccine for JN1. So they started gearing up, but then JN1 started drifting down, and they started to get variants of that. Now they're closely related, but they are different. And so this KP.2 has taken over. And so then the question came up, well, maybe we should make the vaccine for KP.2. And there was some debate back and forth. Well, the JN1 may have a broader coverage of future Omicron ones because it's sort of the parent of this Omicron thing. And but then Dr. Peter Marks, who we are very familiar with and has spoken at Northwestern and helped us with the Covaxin project we had going here. He's a top vaccine regulator, and he said, hey, look, I'll quote him, we are paying an incredibly high premium from mRNA vaccines to be able to have the freshest vaccine. And so they've changed their recommendation, and they have told the companies now to make the vaccine for the KP.2 and KP.3. Now, Moderna Novavax makes the vaccines the older technology with the protein based, and it takes longer to do that. And they already started with the JN1. They can't pivot that quickly. So their vaccine is gonna be for JN1, but the mRNA technology is so flexible that they can switch. So it looks like Moderna and Pfizer will switch their new vaccine to the KP.2 and 3. Now, is one going to work better than the other? It's really hard to say. They're pretty close. I don't know if we'll find a measurable difference, but frankly, I would go with the KP.2 or 3. I mean, I would go with the Moderna or the Pfizer one, but if you don't want to take the mRNA vaccine, the Novavax one will be fine.
Mhm. And on the topic of vaccine development, our first viewer submitted question for this episode, we had a viewer write in and ask, would you be able to respond or speak to the topic of nasal vaccine development and or hand vaccine development? Are there any trials
Yeah.
going on with this, or what's going on in that realm?
Yeah. So the nasal vaccine, this has been going on for a long time. They figure, mostly you're inhaling this actually through the nose and through the mouth. And if you can give the vaccine there, maybe you get a more local response as well. There's a lot of theoretical advantages to the nasal vaccines. Now, there's been a lot of problems with the nasal vaccines. The results have been very mixed. The advantage to a nasal vaccine, of course, you don't need an injection. There's no shot. And maybe even people could take it themselves. You take a little sniff of something and you've got the vaccine. So anyway, that's what's going on with that. People are working on these vaccines, but we have for the flu, there was a quadrivalent nasal flu vaccine called FluMist, manufactured by AstraZeneca for the 23-24 season that just ended. And they announced in March of this year they're going to transition to a trivalent form, just three components instead of 4. We'll see what happens in the next season. They're working on a new formulation, but they haven't. There's no formal announcement yet. So that is available, and I believe though that it's approved for use in people under 50. I'll have to check that, but that's the approval. It's just that not that it wouldn't work in older people, but it was studied in the younger people. It was really designed for kids. On the COVID front, they are looking at a COVID vaccine. The Chinese are looking at it, but they're at the mouse stage. All right, so they just published a study that showed there was 87% protection against severe COVID in mice using their intranasal vaccine. So that's good news. They will most likely go forward and test it in people as well. And then as far as the multi-valent vaccines or the double vaccines, they've got flu and COVID together. There's a lot of data now that shows giving the flu and COVID together actually boosts the response to COVID. It's good that some of these companies are making that. So what's happened is Moderna has a combo product, it's kind of ready to go, a pan vaccine, they call it. And they reported some results on June 10th, just recently, 10 days ago or so. And it could be ready and then it's sometime either this season or the next season. It's not, they're not done because they have an ongoing phase 3 trial. And I don't know if the FDA is going to let them do it before the trial is over. They're going to make them finish it. If they make them completely finish and analyze it, it's not going to be ready until the next season. But we'll see. Everything is upside down now with COVID, and things are moving a lot faster than they had ever moved before.
Yeah, there seems to be a much clearer timeline in terms of that pan vaccine, with Moderna already releasing phase 3 results, even though they are ongoing. We did a lot of digging about flu and COVID nasal vaccines. Only was able to find some breadcrumbs, but nothing official out yet. So we will keep an eye out on that subject.
We'll just keep following that. It'll be a while.
Mm-hmm. Our next question came from another longtime viewer, and they are asking, is research the only reason why we haven't seen the RSV vaccine given to people under 60 or 65? Now we know that it's going to be given to those 50 and up, but what about everyone else?
So RSV is a very bad disease. Now, it is more serious than the flu. It is targets really the youngest kids, like under a year of age, are very high risk. Every year, RSV causes 60 to 80,000 RSV hospitalizations in children under 5, which leads to 100 to 300 deaths. And in older adults, particularly if they're immunocompromised, 60 to 160,000 hospitalizations and 6,000 to 10,000 deaths. So, we just talked about how many people are dying of COVID, which is close to 12,000 a year now if the rates stay stable. So it's kind of in the same range. So you've got these two nasty infections, but this one really targets that under a year of age and then over 60, especially with immunocompromised. So the GSK has been testing in slightly younger people. The other ones are still approved for over 60. So some are approved for 50 and some are approved for 60. And the vaccines are not approved for the children, but they can be approved. They are approved. One of them is approved at least for a pregnant woman, because if the woman gets it, the baby will get the antibody, and then those kids won't get RSV in their first year. So it's like giving the baby the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so those are the groups that can take it and should take it. When kids are born, if they can get the monoclonal antibody, especially if they're at risk, they got some medical problem, they should take the monoclonal antibody, which is called Beyfortus. But there's not enough of that around for every baby. So, the mothers should consider taking that vaccine because that will protect their kids in case they can't get the Beyfortus. I know there's been people scrambling to get it and whatever. Giving the vaccine, protects the mother but in particular protects the baby.
Yeah. And in terms of a timeline for those other groups, when GSK announced that they were expanding to people 50 and over, they announced that they are doing clinical trials with those 18 to 49. Yeah. So we could in the future see another expansion of that RSV vaccine.
The whole thing goes to very few people under 60 who are otherwise healthy are dying from RSV. But that doesn't mean they can't get sick, even land in the hospital, but that is not so severe. However, it just propagates the whole RSV problem. And those people are probably hanging around people over 60, or they've got other people around them who are immunocompromised, who are at risk, or a young child. So the more people that take it, the fewer infections in the really high risk population. So that's kind of one of the drivers of expanding the use of RSV. Now, say you have an older adult living with you who is very much at risk. You don't want to get RSV and then give it to them, even though you're not going to get too sick from it. And so that's one of the reasons to expand the criteria for taking the vaccine. It works very well. I took it myself for the first time before at the start of the season, and very well tolerated. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I'm not yet eligible, but I'm keeping that one in the back of my mind for later.
Yep.
But moving on, so you did touch on pregnant women, which is a group that is very susceptible to several different severe diseases. This new study that came out was about pregnant women during the Omicron phase of COVID and how much the vaccine helped or harmed their pregnancy compared to non-vaccinated mothers. Can you share some of those results?
Yeah, this is a really beautifully designed study called InterCovid 2022. It's prospective, observational cohort study at 40 hospitals across 18 countries from November 21 to June 22. So when you say the word perspective, that means it's not just looking in the past who got sick and they took these women, 4,618 mothers and their 4,707 kids, and they followed them when they were healthy, and then if they got COVID, and then what was the impact of the vaccines? So they could have been unvaccinated, they could have had 1 shot, they could have had 2 shots, they could have had 2 shots plus the booster. So they did all that. And they found in these 4,600 mothers, 1/3 of them got COVID. So that's a big chunk. And some 41% were not vaccinated. 9% were partially vaccinated, and 35% were completely vaccinated, and 15% of those were completely vaccinated with a booster. So what did they find? So this is like the typical kind of study we really want to do, but it takes so long to get these results. Anyway, the infants born to booster vaccinated versus unvaccinated mothers had a lower COVID diagnosis of 54% less. Well, that's good. But look at some more data here. Vaccine effectiveness was greater for infants born to mothers with COVID-19 compared with infants born to mothers without. Okay. And then the infants born to the booster vaccinated mothers, this is the really most important part, were less likely to be preterm, 40% less, or have a medically indicated preterm birth. Again, about a 54% decrease compared with infants born to unvaccinated mothers. And the unvaccinated mothers, so that's a big chunk of these people here, had a greater risk for infections, antibiotic treatment, requiring respiratory support for more than 48 hours. That means they're in the hospital. And death. Death was 2 times higher in those infants compared with infants born to booster vaccinated mothers. So this is really quite dramatic, and it's a beautifully designed study. I mean, there's no question about the validity of this study. If the mother is vaccinated and boosted, less preterm, less serious infections in kids, and less mortality in kids. And it's done over 40 sites in 18 countries. I mean, these results are applicable around the world. I mean, it's a beautiful study, and we've been mentioning these benefits and stuff, but this is really a confirmation that is scientifically very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thousands of children, thousands of mothers from 18 countries across the world. And over a third of them actually ended up getting COVID in the study. So they had a very large sample
That's a
set
lot
to
of
look
COVID.
at.
That's a lot.
Mhm. Now, switching back to the flu, there was a bit of a frightening announcement, at least to my ears. There is news of a drug-resistant dual mutant flu strain that's now being tracked in the US. It is rare, but can you tell us about it?
Well, when you use antibiotics or antiviral agents, after a while, especially if you're only giving them one drug at a time, you will see resistance. And sure enough, and we hadn't seen it. We've used Tamiflu, the drug for flu, for many, many years. And they have found a couple of people, 2 cases, one in Connecticut, one in Michigan, who had these new mutations that they normally don't see. Now, checking these things, it's not done all the time. So, you have to look for it to find it. A lot of places people don't even look for it. But anyhow, these are well documented. These have been found around the world as well, but they have the 2 cases now in the US. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means the Tamiflu doesn't work in them. But the other anti-influenza medications, including the new one, baloxavir, would work. All right. So what does this mean from a practical standpoint? Since it's only a couple cases so far, probably no immediate implication to change the decision for clinical care. So, if you get the flu, take the treatment. The Tamiflu. So take that. If this gets worse, we're going to have to rethink these guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Something to keep our eye on, but as you pointed out, something that we did have to go looking for. So good that we identified it and that we can keep track of it at
Yeah,
least.
so the drug is Tamiflu. I think I said tamoxifen. That's wrong. It's Tamiflu, and the generic name is oseltamivir. But everybody goes by Tamiflu is so easy to say. It's Tamiflu is what we're
Mhm.
talking about here. Sorry about that.
Thank you for the clarification. And for our final two stories, we're going to be looking at things around the globe. First, we've been talking about Mpox a lot. The country of South Africa has reported their first ever Mpox death. Can you tell us a little bit about that situation?
Yeah, well, there's two clades to Mpox, clade 1 and clade 2. Clade 1 is the one found in sub-Saharan Africa that's associated with animals transmitting to humans. And that is associated with up to 10% deaths. Since January of 2023 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, this is clade 1, they had over 20,000 suspected cases and 1,000 deaths, so 5%. We don't, with clade 2, which is what is primarily circulating among men who have sex with men in North America and Western Europe and Australia and whatever in South Africa, this clade 2, there's only been a few reported deaths. But here from South Africa, they're reporting 5 patients were hospitalized with very severe infection, all had comorbidities. So they had underlying diseases. They don't say what they are, but it could have been tuberculosis, it could have been HIV. There's a lot of HIV down there, I mean, there's a lot of other things. They don't say what it is. But anyway, there is another case then there that unfortunately passed away. So even with this clade 1, you have to be careful. And the point is, even here in the United States, there is an effective vaccine. All right, and the vaccine has only been taken by approximately 25% of the people at risk. So again, this is a group that should get vaccinated for Mpox. It's not gone away.
Mm-hmm. And our final story of the day, heading over to a different part of the world, wild headlines out of Japan. A flesh-eating bacteria that can kill in 2 days has been spreading. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, this is a streptococcal toxic shock syndrome. So regular streptococcus, we're familiar with streptococcus, but they've recorded 977 toxic shock cases that killed up to 30% of the people that got infected, and it killed them within 24 hours. So this is what they refer to as a strep A flesh-eating necrotizing fasciitis that can lead to loss of limbs or even death. And I've only seen this once, personally, and it's really frightening. What happens if somebody has a wound, cut, something like that? This was a hospitalized patient that I saw. And you get like around a cut or something, you see red, called erythema, it means red. You see red, and the patient can start feeling sick right away. And that redness, that circle of redness, you can almost watch it grow. Like when you're in the hospital, sometimes you'll see a person with redness around it. You'll see the doctors or the nurse will write with an ink pen or some kind of marker around the border just to see how fast that's spreading. And believe me, you can almost watch it spread. And it's a life-threatening condition that it's very dangerous. So they're reporting a lot of these cases. This is nothing new. I saw this many years ago, but they're having an uptick in cases, and why they want to make a big deal about reporting it is to increase the awareness of the caregivers that this thing is out there again, and that you've got to get, this is something that just like cannot wait. So if you ever have anything like that and it's obviously growing every like hour, you got to get to an emergency room immediately. It's
Mhm.
a very, very serious condition.
Yeah. Yeah, it may not seem like a big deal. It's all the way across the world, but the awareness really is key. Especially we've had a lot of novel small things cropping up here and there in the US, or the boreal pox comes to memory several months ago. So just important to keep these things top of mind.
Yeah,
But on the
one thing just to add here that we have in our notes is that maybe this is due to the indirectly to the COVID pandemic, in that there were in 2022 at least 5 European countries started to show increases in this, followed in the reduction of COVID restrictions and the release of the public with they want inform people with weakened immune systems. And so, maybe now that everything is kind of normalized, these people are more exposed. It's a very indirect association, but and they're saying that about many diseases now that we didn't get exposed to for a couple of years, and now we're exposed to them. So our herd immunity is just starting to improve.
Mhm. Yeah, very interesting stuff there. I'll keep an eye out for more epidemiological studies of that nature, how the COVID pandemic has shifted or affected other trends within the
Yeah,
infectious disease world.
and that's not the only reason, but I mean that could be one of the this immune deficiency or
Mhm.
lack of prior exposure to many things we were constantly exposed to.
Mhm. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Dr. Murphy, for your time and expertise answering our viewer submitted questions, breaking down the latest headlines and articles. Research for us, it is much appreciated.
Well, thank you.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Ask Dr. Murphy series. We hope to see you here again next week. If you have any topics or questions you'd like to see discussed and answered by Dr. Murphy, please leave them down below or comment any of our social medias down in the description. Thank you and have a great weekend.